Hey everyone, my name is Perry and welcome back to the cassette phase. For today's video, I want to talk about my memories of football in the 80s and the 90s. Now this is American football for the viewers outside of the States because it's December. There's been some time off from work, it's cold outside, there's family in town. It just feels like the right time to talk about some football. And for this video specifically, I want to focus on professional football, so the NFL. I do want to talk about college football in the 80s and the 90s too, but I want to save that for a separate video. Because I just have so many memories tied to this sport. It just feels like it's always been there. It's always been a part of life, at family gatherings, at holidays, as kind of like a common thread to talk to people about just for as long as I can remember. Do you have fond memories of watching football as a kid and feel like doing a little reminiscing? Come hang out. Now I'm a big football fan to this day, but it all started back in the 80s. I can remember football being on TV a lot during the weekends, but as a real little kid, I didn't pay much attention. And the earliest NFL football memory that I can trace back, and probably one of my earliest memories in general, was walking into my parents' bedroom while my dad was watching a football game on a little 13-inch probably CRT TV. And the two teams that were playing were the New York Giants and the New York Jets. And I think the reason that this particular game stands out for me is because I was probably confused as to why New York was playing against New York. But I've gone back and tried to track this exact game down before, but I haven't been able to quite pin it down. And I think that the Giants and the Jets played each other a lot in the preseason back then. They may still do that actually. But I can remember the Giants wearing those dark blue uniforms with the slightly darker blue helmets with that really cool white underlined Giants logo on them. And the Jets were wearing white uniforms with green numbers and green helmets with that really cool retro looking Jets logo. And they've actually gone back to that look recently, which I love, but I'll talk about that some more here in a few minutes. So this was probably preseason 1985 or maybe 86. It's hard to go back and tell who was the home team and who was the away team because they shared the same stadium, I think. But either way, it stuck with me. And just shortly thereafter, I began watching NFL games pretty frequently on my own. Now, I never played competitive football myself, never played on a team or anything like that, but we did play a ton of football with the kids in the neighborhood. And we played a lot at recess at school. I can even remember playing football on the playground area of my preschool/daycare. And they must have been low on funds because we didn't have an actual football, so we used one of those plastic bowling pins that came from those old plastic bowling sets that you could get. I don't know why I remember that, but some things, it's just funny how they stick with you. And I can specifically remember playing touch football, two below, at recess at my elementary school. And shout out to Rollingwood Elementary in Oklahoma City for having pebbles filling their playground surface. Surrounding the swings and all the playground equipment were these little tiny pebbles. And there were railroad ties surrounding that whole area meant to hold those things in. But naturally, some of those pebbles would spill out onto the blacktop surface. And that would actually make it kind of slippery sometimes, if that makes sense. But around fourth grade or so, the school opened up this little grassy area on the other side of the playground. And that's where we could get away with playing tackle football once in a while, at least until the teacher stopped us. And then there were the neighborhood games, sometimes in the street, sometimes in an actual field. But it seemed like the organized games that we played in a field, those usually happened on a holiday, like Thanksgiving, for example. And it was just so fun getting together with a bunch of neighborhood kids, some of whom you knew really well, some you had never seen before in your life. And just playing a big, gigantic game of football. There's actually an episode of The Wonder Years that captures this phenomenon perfectly. And sometimes, as like a 7 or 8 year old, I would actually play football in the front yard by myself. If there was no one else around, I didn't care. I got really good at punting the ball up really high and then running to the other side of the yard to catch it. Or like dropping back and throwing the ball really far, and then running under it and diving and catching, and pretending that I was like Jerry Rice or Steve Largent. So let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite aspects of NFL football. And one of the things that first caught my attention, honestly, and that's the team colors, the jerseys, the helmets, and the logos. From the moment I first saw those blue and green helmets in that Giants and Jets game, I've always been kind of fascinated by that part of the game. So let's start with the jersey that I'm wearing here. Now, growing up in places like Arkansas and Oklahoma and eventually Texas, I've always been a big Cowboys fan. But as a real little kid, I kind of thought that the Cowboys helmet and jersey and like their colors and everything was a little bit dull compared to some of the other teams I was seeing on TV. Now, I've since come around and really appreciate the classic nature of the Cowboys branding. But back in the 80s, the Cowboys were not good either. They were not really fun to watch. There was nothing really exciting about watching them on TV. Now, that all changed, of course, when we got to the 90s and they ended up winning 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. I remember thinking the old Denver Broncos helmets and jerseys were awesome. They had those bright orange jerseys with the light blue helmet. That was unique, and plus they had John Elway running the show, so they were really fun to watch. And the Broncos actually brought that uniform combo back as a throwback for a game this year against the Raiders, and that was incredible. Seeing that again was like instant time travel. I also really liked the look that the Minnesota Vikings had going back then. Similar to the Giants, the helmet was just slightly darker than the jersey, but the purple was unique, and the helmet logo was just classic. And it reminds me of players like Anthony Carter and Chris Carter. And possibly my favorite helmet and uniform combination from back then was the Miami Dolphins. Now, you have to remember, in the 80s, prior to the 90s, you didn't see a lot of teal. Teal wasn't everywhere yet. So the fact that the Vikings were wearing teal with orange accents, I just thought that was awesome. And they had that really cool dolphin logo on their helmet jumping through the sun. And I was just a big Dan Marino fan too. Loved watching him play. He actually made me want to go out and buy a pair of Isotoner gloves. Remember that? A couple other jersey and helmet combos that I really like. Surprisingly, the Cleveland Browns with that simple, solid orange helmet and that brown uniform. It's kind of different. Makes you think of fall. And then also the Seattle Seahawks with the silver helmet and those like bright royal blue jerseys with the forest green accents. Those are awesome. And they've done a throwback of that look in recent years, and I just think it's superior to their current look. And this may be an unpopular choice, but I really liked the old light creamsicle orange uniforms of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I really liked the Kelly green and silver look of the Philadelphia Eagles back then. And then there was the Cincinnati Bengals. I always thought that was cool as a kid, really eye-catching with the bright orange helmets with the tiger stripes and the black uniforms. Just makes me think of Boomer Esiason and Ickey Woods and doing the Ickey Shuffle. So I guess an overarching theme here is that more often than not, I prefer the old look to the new stuff. And that should surprise no one. But were these objectively better designs, or was it just nostalgia? Maybe a little bit of both. What do you all think, though? Who has the best looking helmets and uniforms in the NFL? So I can't talk about NFL football without sharing some of the TV memories and talking about the commercials and the announcers. So let me set the stage for you here on a couple of different scenarios. So for this first one, it's a crisp, cool Sunday afternoon in the fall, and you've just gotten done eating lunch, maybe playing a little Nintendo. You're thinking about going outside to see if your friends want to throw the ball around, but you figure, maybe I'll catch a little bit of the game first. So you turn on the TV and flip it to CBS, and you hear this music. Does that not take you back? Okay, let's do another one. So for this one, it's Monday. You just got done with a long day at school. It's fall, so it gets dark earlier, right? And you've just finished eating dinner, maybe some Campbell's soup or something that warms you up. And you've convinced your parents to let you stay up for the first half of the Monday night game, assuming that you have your homework done. So you've got your most comfortable pajamas on, and you settle down onto the carpet, and you hear this music. And how can I at least not give a quick mention to football video games? Things like Tecmo Bowl and Super Tecmo Bowl. Running around with Bo Jackson, and then eventually leading to things like Madden 94 and beyond. Now, before I take you over to the rug for a little NFL collectible show and tell, I want to talk about a few of my favorite NFL moments from the 80s and the 90s. Now, of course, good moments and bad moments can vary based on your favorite teams. So let's start with the first Super Bowl that I ever watched. January 31st, 1988, Super Bowl 22. So this would have been the end of the 1987 season. We had the Denver Broncos versus the Washington Redskins. Now, as I mentioned, I was all in on the Broncos. I loved their helmets and their jerseys. And I loved John Elway, and they had some really fun to watch wide receivers. And the Redskins, on the other hand, well, they were a hated division rival of my favorite team, so naturally, I was rooting against them. And the game started off great, as I recall. A long bomb touchdown from John Elway to Ricky Nattiel started things off, and I remember just being super excited. But from that point on, it was all Redskins. Behind Doug Williams at quarterback, Timmy Smith, the running back, and some really, really good wide receivers like Ricky Sanders and Art Monk. But Washington just took it to Denver. I think it was 42-10 was the final. And I was a little bit bummed, but overall, I was just excited to be watching this spectacle that is the Super Bowl for the very first time. I also really loved Super Bowl 23 the next year between the San Francisco 49ers and the Cincinnati Bengals. This was a really close game with a comeback at the end led by Joe Montana. The Bengals had some really fun players too, like I mentioned, Boomer Esiason, Ickey Woods doing his Ickey Shuffle touchdown dance is always really memorable. But the Niners had, of course, Jerry Rice and Roger Craig and John Taylor. What was his name? Rathman, the fullback. Just so many great players in that game. Now, fast forward a couple of years, I remember I was cheering for our second favorite team at the time, which was the St. Louis Cardinals. And yes, they were called the St. Louis Cardinals in football too. And they were in the same division as the Cowboys and the Redskins and the Giants and the Eagles. And I remember that our family was such big St. Louis Cardinals fans in baseball that it made sense for us to cheer for the St. Louis Cardinals in football. Well, the Cardinals had a shot at the playoffs this year, and they were playing the Cowboys in the very last game of the season. And the Cowboys had been eliminated already, so they had nothing to play for. And so we ended up cheering for the Cardinals and rooting against the Cowboys for, I think, the first time ever. Well, of course, the Cowboys ended up winning that game and eliminating the Cardinals from playoff contention. So I guess that's sports, though. And then we make it to the early 90s. And I remember thinking, hey, the Cowboys are playing a little bit better. I can vividly remember a playoff game, 1991, against the Bears, where the Cowboys actually won and advanced to the next round. Now, they ended up getting blown out the next week by Barry Sanders and the Detroit Lions. But hey, it was progress. And then the next year, the Cowboys dynasty officially began. And I had some new favorite players beyond just the big three triplets, as we called them at the time. I remember pretending to be Alvin Harper when I played football against my friends. And I really liked a lot of other players like Jay Novacek, Ken Norton Jr., and eventually Deion Sanders. Now, 2 out of the 3 Super Bowls that the Cowboys would go on to win between 92 and 95 were against the Buffalo Bills. And I actually ended up really liking the Buffalo Bills at the time. They were fun to watch. Jim Kelly and Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas. So I ended up cheering for them in their other games. And now that's another uniform and helmet combination that they should really go back to once in a while. Now I could probably go on all day talking about NFL memories, but I'm going to stop here for this video. We might do another video in the future, we'll have to see, but I want to take you over to the rug and show you some of my favorite, most nostalgic NFL collectible items. Okay everyone, welcome back to the rug and to the ottoman here, where I'm going to show you just a few of my favorite NFL related items from the vintage collection here. So since we are the cassette phase after all, we're going to start off with some VHS tapes. Now who remembers these mail away Sports Illustrated tapes that you could get? I remember seeing the advertisements for them on TV, and I remember when NFL Films would run those great specials on ESPN on the weekends. Show the biggest hits and the best plays and all the bloopers and all of that. So whenever I see these types of tapes, I always grab them. They're always so fun to watch and such a blast from the past. This one here, some of those great helmets and uniforms I was talking about. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is just, the biggest hits. Most of these probably wouldn't even be legal in today's game, but fun tape to watch for sure. Next up we have Sports Illustrated Football Follies. These are always some of my favorite to watch. Looks like the cover is the same on the front and the back on these. Super Duper Football Follies. NFL Films. Okay. And then here we have Football Follies on Parade. And there's one of those great Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniforms. Let's see, same thing on the back on this one too. Oh, nope, we got something different this time. Football Follies on Parade. And there's that great Rams uniform. Yeah, and weren't these all hosted by Steve Sable? And they've got great music in them. Just great tapes. A lot of fun to watch. And then this one here, we've got Get the Feeling Speed. And there's Dan the Man. Now this one wasn't all football. There was hockey and basketball and other sports in this tape as well. Racing. Check that little advertisement out. It's got to be a Dodge. Yeah, I don't know that as great of a quarterback as Dan Marino was, I wouldn't think he was fast. I guess maybe they're talking about how fast he threw the ball. Maybe that's what they were going for there. And then you've got the 1992 Pro Football Spectacular. Great shots of, Thurman Thomas from the Bills. You got Barry Sanders, I think, or maybe that's, yeah. With those great Jets helmets right above. And then some Redskins and some Bears. Yeah, like I said, 1991 season was when the Cowboys finally turned it around. And they went on to be really, really good for half a decade and then be mediocre for the 3 decades following. So, but I guess that's part of being a fan. Anyway, let's keep it moving. So this next item may seem pretty basic, pretty simple, but I've got great memories tied to each of these. And that's these NFL pencils. Now I only have the AFC, but let's take a look at some of these here. Also, before we do, check out that mug. How 90s is that? Those great old Burger King and Pepsi logos. Let's see, we got the schedule. Oh, I say 90s. This was 1987. So even older than I thought. But yeah, I think it's a perfect little holder for these awesome, unsharpened NFL pencils. Now these were all the rage at my elementary school. Right across from the cafeteria, we had a little school store where, you could buy pencils and cap erasers and, rulers and folders and notebook paper and all that kind of stuff. Well, we didn't care about most of that. What we wanted were the NFL pencils, and we would trade them on the playground, kind of like they were football cards or something. And there were certain teams that were more sought after than others. Like, for whatever reason, there were always a bunch of Cleveland Browns ones left. And the person working would be like, well, I've got Browns and I've got, Oilers or Patriots, and that's all we have left. And you'd be like, okay, they're charging me 25 cents. I'll go ahead and grab a couple. But did anyone else have these at your school? Great old logos and graphics and colors, and these are just immediate time travel for me. I need to eventually track down the NFC teams, because there's some great ones in that lot as well. So yep, good old unused, unsharpened NFL pencils. And you can almost smell that through the phone, can't you? Really fun stuff there. Happy to have them. Okay, these next few items are pretty basic, just standard little plastic mini helmets, but always fun to collect. The one in particular I want to show you right here is the Miami Dolphins. Now this was actually a piggy bank, as you can see, and it's just missing the bottom. But like I mentioned in the earlier part of the video, I just love the look and colors of that helmet. They were using teal before teal was cool. And I'm always keeping an eye out for these banks. Sometimes you can find a good deal. I keep this one on the TV stand out in the garage, as you'll probably see in some of the B-roll. But yeah, love that. And then I've got two more small ones, but they're not for teams. These are actually beer helmets. Let me see if I can get them to stand. Not really, but okay, so we've got Budweiser. And then, of course, their opponent, Bud Dry. And I was actually kind of hoping this would be Bud Light, but that's okay. And this makes me think of the Bud Bowl. Do you remember when they used to do the Bud Bowl every year at the Super Bowl? It was just a series of commercials where it would be, Budweiser bottles versus Bud Light bottles. And they'd put them in all these funny little situations. And that was always my favorite Super Bowl commercial. And Super Bowl commercials were a big deal back then, but nothing for me topped the good old Bud Bowl. Anyone else?
Bud Bowl 2. Later today on CBS.
Moving on here, we've got some action figures. I guess you could call them action figures. From Starting Lineup. Who didn't have at least one Starting Lineup figure back in the late 80s, early 90s? I've only got a few here, a few football ones, but again, some of my favorite players. You got John Elway in my favorite uniform combo. Got Jerry Rice. Now, I kind of wish I had the one where he's wearing the red jersey, but that's okay. This one's still awesome. Great pose on that one. You got Dan Marino. And of course you have Troy Aikman. And his helmet's kind of coming off there. Let me see if I can. There we go. Yeah, I feel like any friend's house you went over to when you were a kid, they had at least a couple of these, whether they were the baseball or the football or the basketball or the hockey, sitting on a shelf. Great memories, the starting lineup. So for these next couple of items, I'm really just including them because in the earlier part of the video, I didn't get a chance to talk about, or I kind of forgot to talk about, honestly, some of my favorite announcers and, you know, what they brought to the game. And when you're talking about announcers, you have to talk about the legend himself, John Madden, right? Now, if you have been following this channel, you know that I'm new to Sega Genesis. So I haven't played these yet, but I did play both of these, especially 94, on the Super Nintendo when I was a kid. Great games, you know. It was a good little growth from what we had on Tecmo Bowl and Super Tecmo Bowl, which were also great games. But yeah, just the fact that you had the legend John Madden with his name on it made it pretty cool. You know, Thanksgiving was a couple weeks ago, and we were just talking about how many Thanksgiving games did we watch where John Madden and Pat Summerall did the call, and you know, and John Madden was giving out turkey legs and talking about all the stuff that he was going to eat, and giving his great, you know, expert commentary on the game all the while. So just, yeah, really a legend, coach, and then announcer, of course. I feel like he has to be mentioned anytime you're talking about the history of the NFL. And the last items that I want to show you today, you've probably seen them on the shelf when I do the room tour, or anytime I'm, you know, walking around the room with the camera, you can usually see these. But I wanted to give you a closer look at these vintage ceramic NFL mugs, or I guess you could even call them steins for how big they are. But I just think these have a great look to them. You know, the colors pop. They've got that grid pattern on them, which is just a classic sign from the times. And I only have 4 so far, but I'm always looking out for more. I would eventually like to have the whole set. Similar to the NFL pennants that I have hanging out in the garage. And I'll show you some B-roll of that. I only have, I don't know, 10 or 12 of those so far, but I eventually want to get all of them and organize them by division. I think that would look cool out there. You know, they capture the look of the helmets, and I like the style of those. Those pennants are the ones that I had a couple of teams of on my bedroom wall as a kid. So yeah, I'm not just looking for any old pennant, I'm looking for a very specific style of them. But anyway, back to the mugs. On the other side, you've got the team name in this really cool retro script. And there we are. So I hope you all enjoyed this nostalgic little trip back to what I consider to be the glory days of NFL football. And if you did, consider subscribing. We talk about all kinds of things from the 80s and 90s on this channel. But for now, and as always, relax, enjoy life, and be kind. We'll see you in the next one.